Miskavlanu Yaakov Selah Adonai Sevaos Ashrei Adam Boteach Bach Adonai Hoshia Hamelech Yanenu B'Yom Koreinu LaYehudim HaSahoira V'Simcha V'Sason V'Hikar Yen Tiyeh Lanu Kol Kos Yeshuos Esahu v'shem Adonai ekra. Lai lai la 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 lai 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 la 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 lai yai dai da 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 dum ma da 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 dum. A good vach, Shavua Tov. How's everybody doing? Wishing you a great week, an amazing week, the week of Passover, coming up Wednesday night. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Saturday night? Bill in mid-Missouri. Can't promise I'll stay in class, but I'll do my best. It's late on the East Coast. Always impressed with everyone checking in from there. Joe in the Inland Empire. Paula in Chicago. The other Paula in the Great Northwest. Paula says Shabbat Shalom. Bella in Florida. Ryan wishing everyone a good evening. Anxiously waiting for Pesach. Also, I am making matzah lasagna tomorrow. That sounds interesting. I think maybe you want to use not regular matzah, right? Like I think right now we don't want to eat regular matzah until Pesach, but you can use like egg matzah or something else like that at this point. Check that out. Check it out. Look that up. Google it. Melissa in Great Neck. Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey. Gabriel says, praise the Lord. Lisa. Over there on the YouTube side, Gwen in Michigan, Aoife in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. These pages in Tractate Sotah are on the long side, so we better just jump in. We picked this up. We're on page 3 here in Tractate Sotah, the 18th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of the suspected adulteress. Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 1 is all about the nature of the warning. The sota procedure gets triggered, right? A husband has some cause for suspicion that his wife is perhaps having a dalliance with some man who is not her husband, and he warns her, do not seclude yourself with that man, that particular man. He has to name the man. And all agree that for this warning to actually trigger the process of sota, there have to be 2 witnesses to the warning. Then, if 2 witnesses see that she secludes herself with that man, even after the warning of her husband, so 2 witnesses and 2 witnesses, that's per the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Eliezer says 1 witness will suffice to witness the seclusion with that man. 2 witnesses needed for the initial warning. So she does that. At that point, the husband and wife become prohibited to each other. They cannot sleep together again. They're prohibited to each other until they go to Jerusalem and she drinks the bitter waters in the temple through the whole sota procedure. The temple's not standing, so this is not possible to do, hasn't been possible in 2,000 years. So husbands don't issue such a warning in front of witnesses that might trigger this procedure. Instead, inspect your own behavior, talk it through, couples therapy, counseling, do what you need to do, save the marriage, don't trigger this procedure. Even when the temple is standing, sages say not a great idea to get involved in the sota procedure. Now, if there were 2 witnesses to the warning and 2 witnesses to the seclusion, and then even 1 witness who actually saw her sleep with that guy, then at that point, the sota procedure is off the table because she has slept with that man. She now becomes fully prohibited to her husband. They have to divorce. They can't use the sota procedure to save the marriage, which is really its purpose. Okay. We picked this up near the bottom of page 2b. Reish Lakish says, what is the meaning of the term warning, right? This is the husband warns the wife, don't seclude yourself with that man. The word is kinui. So it means a matter that causes anger, right? The warning itself, the word for warning in this context, kinui, is related to the word kina, which means anger. And it causes anger between her and others. Her and others, what does this mean? Well, other men will not understand why she does not wish to be friendly with them anymore. And the Gemara comments, well, apparently he holds that a warning is effective based on the husband's own testimony. Right? We saw that some opinions held that for the warning, only one witness is sufficient, and the husband himself can be that witness. That's not the law, but there was an opinion to that effect. So apparently Reish Lakish holds that a warning is effective based on the husband's own testimony, and therefore everyone will not know that her husband issued a warning to her, and that's why she is like avoiding being in any kind of situation where it could be misconstrued that she is secluded with a man who's not her husband, but they don't know that he issued that warning, and so they think that she just suddenly became unfriendly. And so that causes, animosity between her and other people, with other men. And therefore, everyone else will not know that her husband issued a warning to her, and they will say, what is this matter happening before us that she separates herself from us? And they will come to act in anger with her. And Rav Yemar bar Rabbi Shalemia says, in the name of Abaye, no, the term kinui here, warning, is related to anger, kina, but not between her and these random guys or even her friends. Rather, it is a matter that causes anger between the husband and the wife. And the Gemara comments, apparently he holds that a warning is effective based on the testimony of two witnesses, which is the halacha, that is the law. And since there are witnesses, so if there are witnesses, that means that the community will generally know that this husband was suspicious of his wife and he warned her not to seclude herself with other men. And now that the community knows that this, marriage is having some difficulty where a husband has to issue a warning to the wife, that's going to cause further strife. In fact, raise the strife level in the home between the husband and wife. Therefore, the warning does not cause anger between her and others. And the husband is he who will come to act in anger with her, as they will have mutual antagonism toward each other. Now we're at the top of 3a. And this idea that, once they start to go down this road, it won't be healing. It won't be a healing process for them. It will be that elevates anger. And anger in the home is very dangerous to a couple and to their home. And we're going to actually see that stated explicitly a little bit further on in this daf. Apparently, both Reish Lakish and Rav Yemar bar Rabbi Shalema hold that it is prohibited to issue the warning. Both are of the opinion that the word kinui is a term for anger, and since causing anger is a negative trait, it follows that it is prohibited, or at least discouraged, to issue the warning. That's what I was saying before, and they said yesterday, don't go into the sota procedure. This has something in common with the Nazir procedure, right? We saw that the sages say, okay, the Torah says you can make a vow to abstain from wine, becoming impure for the dead, cutting the hair, and elevate your sanctity level, but so many problems can issue from that, it is better not to do it. And likewise, it seems they're advising against getting involved in the sota procedure. It's not saying that you should tolerate cheating in a spouse, but what it's saying is find some way to reconcile your differences without involving the temple and the sota procedure, etc. So the Gemara asks, and according to the one who says that it is permitted for him to issue a warning, what is the meaning of the term kinui? And Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says the term kinui means nothing other than a term of forewarning. And so it says, then the Lord warned Vayikana concerning his land and had pity for his people. Now that's from the book of Joel 2:18. As detailed in that passage, the Lord ordered the locusts to stop destroying Eretz Yisrael. Right? The idea in that story is that God sent a plague of locusts to Israel as a warning. You people are behaving very badly. You keep it up, and it's going to get much worse for you. Right? So it's a warning that, in a sense, is issued in love, and all it means is warning. Warning, you are now warned. Right? So according to this opinion, it's not discouraged to use the sota procedure, or at least it's not discouraged to use the warning aspect of this procedure. Now, it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Meir would say, a person commits a transgression in private, and the Holy One, blessed be He, proclaims about him openly, i.e. in public, that he transgressed, as it is stated concerning a sota. She transgressed in private, right? If she had First of all, she secluded herself with a man, not her husband. That's already bad. And if she actually slept with him, but all of that happened in private. And then the matter becomes known, right? The matter becomes public, right? And so the spirit, and so how does this happen? The spirit of jealousy came upon him. Numbers 5:14. So the idea here is that it's like the husband who becomes aware that his wife is, either flirting with other men or actually cheating on him. How does he become aware? It's almost like a spirit of prophecy comes down to him, from above. And the term avira means nothing other than a term of proclamation, as it is stated, and Moses gave the commandment and they caused it to be proclaimed throughout the camp, right? So it becomes known to him, and then he triggers the sota procedure with a warning in front of witnesses, and now what was a private matter between husband and wife becomes a community matter. Now, Rav Ashi says a man commits a transgression only if a spirit of folly, shetut, enters him, as it is stated, if any man's wife goes aside, tiste, Numbers 5:12. And the word tiste is written with the Hebrew letter shin, affording an alternative reading, tishte, which is related to the term for folly, the word shetut. Now, this teaching is actually one that comes up often in the Talmud, this idea that a Jew commits a transgression only as a moment of temporary insanity, right? Like the Jewish soul that we carry around within ourselves comes, from above. A soul comes from above, and now and this is particular is a Jewish soul. And is riding around in a Jewish body. Now, the Jewish soul is very near to God, comes from God, wants to return to God, and the last thing that the soul wants to do is commit aveiros, right? Commit sins, make transgressions against the Torah. Why does it happen? Well, because the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination that's sort of lodged in the body, as it were, the bodily needs, the hungers, right, the animal hungers, the animal appetites of the person, causes him to overcome his Yetzer Tov, his good inclination. And so it's not his true and authentic self. The idea is that when we transgress, that's not really our true selves. That's just the animal instinct overcoming the true self, because the soul is held captive in the body, as it were. So likewise, this woman, if she, acted in this way to violate the sanctity of her marriage, it's not really her. It's a spirit of folly, a spirit of insanity that overcame her. Now, the Gemara discusses why the testimony of one witness suffices with regard to defilement. As we mentioned, 2 witnesses necessary for the warning to be an official warning to her. 2 witnesses necessary to say that, well, then after the warning, she secluded herself, at which point the husband and wife become prohibited to each other until she drinks the bitter waters of a sota. But a single witness is enough to say that, well, and when she secluded herself with that man, she actually slept with him. I saw it. At that point, the husband and wife can never be together again. They must divorce because we've established that she cheated on him. Now, one witness is not sufficient to say, I saw your wife sleep with another guy, and then these people are prohibited to each other and they must divorce. That's going to require 2 witnesses. One witness is sufficient here because we've already established that she was warned in front of 2 witnesses. She secluded herself in front of 2 witnesses. And then there's one witness that actually saw the defilement. But the Gemara will continue to discuss this. So the school of Yishmael taught a baraisa. For what reason did the Torah deem credible a single witness with regard to that third step, defilement of a sota? It is because there is basis for anticipating the matter, as there is strong circumstantial evidence that she committed adultery. And what is the basis for anticipating the matter? As he warned her not to seclude herself with a specific man, and she nevertheless secluded herself with him, and then one witness testifies that she is defiled, well, then the combination of that whole pattern of behavior and the testimony of the single witness renders it reasonable to assume that she has in fact committed adultery. Rav Papa said to Abaye, but when the warning is written in the Torah, it is written in the verse after seclusion and defilement are mentioned. Right, so that we see that there's warning, seclusion, and then possibly defilement. But when the Torah describes this pattern of events that leads up to her becoming a sota, it actually changes the order of these events. right? The Torah describes it differently. The order in which the Torah describes the sota process seems to indicate that the husband's warning is issued only after the wife already secluded herself with the other man and was defiled. How do we see that? The verses actually say, Numbers 5, 13, and 14. And a man lie with her carnally, and it was hidden from the eyes of her husband, and she was defiled secretly, and there is no witness against her, and she was not taken, meaning she was not raped. And the spirit of jealousy, ve'avar, came upon the husband, and he warned his wife, and she had become defiled. Why is the warning only mentioned in the Torah after the seclusion and the defilement? So Abaye said to him in response, that which the verse states, and the spirit of jealousy came upon him, means it had already come upon him. That the husband had warned his wife not to seclude herself with a specific man prior to her seclusion and defilement. And the Gemara asks, well, if that is so, the ve'avar is referring to a matter that already occurred. Then, in the matter of the agreement between Moses and the tribes of Gad and Reuben, before they entered the land of Israel, right? So Gad and Reuben were two of the tribes that when the children of Israel were finally entering the promised land after being in the wilderness for 40 years, these were tribes that had certain kinds of flocks that would do very well in the land on the east side of the Jordan River. So they said to Moses, we could just settle right here. This would be good for us. And Moses, we just wandered 40 years, all the time, looking forward to entering the promised land that God has promised us. And now you're telling me you want to just stop on the edge of the land and not actually enter? And they said, but this is good for us. And Moses was kind of angry, and they said, but don't misunderstand, we will help with the conquest of the land, and then we'll come back, and we'll use this land right here, and it'll just actually enlarge our territory. So Moses makes them make a promise. All right, if you promise to come in and be part of the entire nation as we conquer the land and take it over, and only then you come back here, then okay, your proposal is good. But if you don't do that, it's going to go very bad for you. And we actually learned from that event that the proper way to make a contract with somebody is to say, if you do such and such, then this will happen. And if you don't do such and such, then that thing will not happen. And you should list out both possibilities, not just assume that, well, the promise is only good if you do this, and then not mention what will happen if you don't do it, right? A proper contract includes both sides. That's a digression. At any rate, why are we bringing up the tribes of Reuben and Gad here in this context? Where am I lost my place. Where am I? Here. So the Gemara says, if so, that the ve'avar is referring to a matter that already occurred, then in the case of the agreement between Moses and the tribes of Gad and Reuben before they entered Eretz Yisrael, where he stated, and every armed man of you will pass over ve'avar the Jordan, Numbers 32:21. So too, did he mean that they had already crossed? No, they had not already crossed. He was talking about they will cross. So doesn't it mean that the same word used here in the context of the sota means that the guy only became jealous of her actually after she already secluded herself and slept with some other guy, and only then he issues the warning? Right? In the case of Moses and Reuben and Gad, Moses was stipulating a condition with regard to the future because they had yet to cross the Jordan. And the Gemara answers there, from the fact that it is written, and the land he subdued, the fact that it is written, quote, and the land be subdued before the Lord, and you return afterwards. Number 32:22, it is clear that that passage is teaching about the future. But here, in the case of the sota, if it enters your mind that the verses should be understood as they are written in the Torah, and that ve'avar is after the defilement and seclusion, then why do I need a warning? If she already slept with a man who's not her husband, why would he warn her? It's over. The marriage is over. Once a woman cheats, they need to become divorced. But here, if it enters your mind, why do I need the warning? If the woman had already secluded herself with the man and become defiled, the husband's warning would be irrelevant, as she had already become forbidden to him. Therefore, the word ve'avar in this context must be referring to a past event, i.e. the husband issuing a warning to his wife prior to the seclusion. And the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught a man issues a warning to his wife only if a spirit entered into him, as it is stated, and the spirit of jealousy came upon him, and he warned his wife. And the Gemara asks, well, what kind of spirit is Rabbi Yishmael talking about? And the rabbis say a spirit of impurity, as one should not issue a warning to one's wife. So earlier I said it's almost like, how did the husband figure out that she's cheating on him or that she's dallying with somebody? You know, it's some kind of a spirit that enters him, and it's a spirit, not of prophecy, but like that, right? It's a kind of a spirit from above. But here, Rabbi Yishmael says, no, it's not a spirit like from above, like a spirit of purity, a good force. Rather, it's a spirit of impurity. And I'm not saying it's demonic, but it's something that is harmful, right? It's a spirit that is harmful because it's going to trigger this sota procedure, and it's going to end up being bad for their marriage. So the spirit of jealousy, and you can see a spirit of jealousy doesn't sound like a good thing. So you think, so it seems like Rabbi Yishmael has a good point, right? Of what spirit, so, right, a man issues a warning to his wife only if a spirit entered into him. As it is stated, the spirit of jealousy came upon him, and he warned his wife. And the Gemara asks, of what spirit does Rabbi Yishmael speak? A spirit of impurity, say the rabbis, because one should not issue such a warning. Rav Ashi says, no, it's a spirit of purity, as issuing a warning indicates that he will not tolerate promiscuous behavior. It's good that he has this spirit. It's good that he issues the warning. She might not have realized that her conduct was unbecoming. She wasn't meaning to, get into some kind of a dalliance or affair with that other man. She was maybe just doing her work or just being friendly. She wasn't meaning anything by it. The husband says, listen, don't do that. And now she understands that it's off limits, and she doesn't do it anymore, and it's good for the marriage, right? So you can see that there's two sides to this argument. So the Gemara comments, and it stands to reason, like the one who says that Rabbi Yishmael was speaking of a spirit of purity, as it is taught in a baraisa, and he warned his wife, i.e. the issuing of the warning is optional, that the husband is neither commanded nor prohibited from issuing the warning. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. So the idea that you become jealous, you have a feeling that your wife has secluded herself with some guy, that she's having kind of a too friendly with this guy, and so you might think, shall I issue a warning to her in front of witnesses? Don't seclude yourself with that man. So shall I? Rabbi Yishmael would say, well, it's optional. You could do it, you could not do it. You don't have to do it, you're not prohibited from doing it. Rabbi Akiva says that when you become aware that she's having kind of inappropriate dalliance with some guy, it is mandatory to issue that warning. Rabbi Akiva says it is mandatory, as one who sees his wife behaving in an inappropriate manner with another man is obligated to warn her. And the Gemara explains, granted, if you say that Rabbi Yishmael was speaking of a spirit of purity, then it is well, as it may be optional or even mandatory to issue a warning. But if you say that he was speaking of a spirit of impurity, can it be optional or mandatory for a person to introduce of a spirit of impurity into himself? The Torah would not require a husband to act in a manner that results from having a spirit of impurity enter into him. So we can say it might not be a good idea, but it is not malicious or evil or demonic or something like. It's not a spirit of impurity that causes the man to issue the warning. Now we're going to have a debate between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva of, okay, it's okay to do it, so it's not prohibited, right? Maybe even not discouraged, but is it optional or is it mandatory? So the Gemara discusses the matter itself, and he warned his wife, i.e., the warning is optional. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, it is mandatory. And the Gemara notes that Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva engage in a similar dispute with regard to several other matters in the Torah. Although under normal circumstances it is prohibited, for example, for a priest to become ritually impure through contact with a corpse, right? A Kohen is not allowed to enter into a cemetery, is not allowed to participate in the embalming of a corpse, is not allowed to be a pallbearer. He may not become impure for the dead. What's the exception? For close relatives. For close relatives, he is permitted to do that. So if a close relative of his dies, is he permitted or obligated to become impure for the dead in that situation? Rabbi Yishmael will say optional, it's permitted. Rabbi Akiva will say commanded. He is commanded, it is mandatory. Right? The Baraisa teaches, although under normal circumstances it is prohibited for a priest to become ritually impure through contact with a corpse, the verse states that he may do so for the sake of burying his close relatives. And the Baraisa teaches for her he may become impure, i.e. for a priest to participate in the burial of his sister. Despite the fact that he will contract ritual impurity, it is optional. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. A priest is not obligated to participate, but he may. And Rabbi Akiva says it is mandatory for him to do so. And the verse states, another example, of them you may take your bondmen forever. Meaning, that's Leviticus 25:46, that if you have a Canaanite slave, right? We haven't done this in thousands of years, but when we first entered the land of Israel and had that conquest, so the Jews at that time, under the leadership of Joshua, Moses' successor, they were told that there were certain evil people living in the land, evil because they were participating and elevated to a high religious practice, child sacrifice, among other things. And those particular people living in the land were supposed to be wiped out. Do not let any of them remain. Some of them did remain under certain contexts, related peoples, other peoples. At any rate, there's this idea of the Canaanite slave. Now, a Canaanite slave, unlike a Jewish slave, right? Jews could become slaves of other Jews if, for example, they stole and could not repay, or they got into debt and could not repay. Then they would basically become an indentured servant for a period of 6 years, and then they would go free. You could become a permanent slave as a Jew to a Jew by choice, right? A person could decide he wanted to remain a slave, that it was better for him with his master, and then he would go through a ritual for that. But it was his choice, not the master's. Whereas with a Canaanite slave, they could be permanent slaves. Now, about that matter, here it says, right, of them you may take your bondmen forever, i.e. keeping one's Canaanite slave forever is optional. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. One is not enjoined against emancipating a Canaanite slave, but one is permitted to keep his Canaanite slaves forever. Rabbi Akiva says it is mandatory, and it is prohibited for one to free his Canaanite slave. Now, Rav Papa said to Abaye, and some said that Rabbi Misharshia said to Rava, shall we say that Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva disagree in this manner with regard to the entire Torah? In other words, is it so that whenever there is a statement where it is unclear whether it is referring to an optional or a mandatory act, that one master, Rabbi Yishmael, says it is optional, and the other master, Rabbi Akiva, says that it is obligatory? Abaye said to Rav Papa in response, here in these particular cases, they disagree with regard to the meaning of these specific verses, but it is not a general dispute. We just had the three examples, right? In the case of warning the sota, in the case of a priest becoming impure for his close relatives, and in the case of not freeing a Canaanite slave, Rabbi Yishmael says optional, Rabbi Akiva says mandatory. The Gemara explains the dispute in these specific contexts, beginning with the dispute concerning the warning to the man's wife. And he warned his wife. This warning is optional, says Rabbi Yishmael. Mandatory, says Rabbi Akiva. What is the reason of Rabbi Yishmael? He holds, in accordance with the statement of this Tana, as it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, with regard to that which the Torah said, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. One might have thought that this prohibition applies in a case such as this one, when one sees his wife behaving improperly with another man, and the verse would instruct the husband to avoid conflict and strife. Therefore, the verse states, and the spirit of jealousy came upon him, and he warned his wife, teaching that it is permitted for one to issue a warning to his wife in such a case. No, you don't have to, suppress that feeling of anger toward the wife. You can express it with this warning. And the Gemara asks, okay, so how does Rabbi Akiva derive that this warning is mandatory? And the Gemara answers, well, there is another warning written in the same verse, because the entire verse goes like this. And the spirit of jealousy came upon him, and he warned his wife, and she be defiled, or if the spirit of jealousy came upon him, and he warned his wife, and she be not defiled. Therefore, the first half of the verse teaches that it is permitted to issue the warning, and the second half, when the word warning is repeated, according to Rabbi Akiva, teaches that it is in fact mandatory. And the Gemara asks, how does Rabbi Yishmael explain the repetition? Right? He says it's only optional. So how does he? Why then does the Torah repeat warning? And the Gemara answers, since it is needed to write in this verse both possibilities as to whether the woman was unfaithful and she be defiled and she not be defiled, to teach that although it is uncertain whether she had become defiled, she is still forbidden to her husband. Therefore, it is also written, and he warned his wife a second time. And this repetition should not be interpreted as rendering the issue it should not be interpreted to say that rendering the warning is mandatory, right? So Rabbi Yishmael is saying, listen, the reason that the word warning is repeated is because there's two possibilities. She becomes defiled or she didn't. But in either case, if the warning was issued in front of two witnesses and the seclusion was witnessed by two witnesses, the husband and wife become prohibited to each other until she drinks the bitter waters. That's what we learn out from warning, not that the warning is mandatory if the husband has reason to believe she had a dalliance. And this manner of interpreting verses is as taught by the school of Rabbi Yishmael. As the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, every passage in the Torah that was stated and repeated was repeated only for the novel element introduced therein. Now, what's interesting is that sounds like, well, if the word warning was repeated, it must be to teach something new. Like Rabbi Akiva is saying, it's teaching us that the warning is mandatory. But basically what they're saying is it's teaching something new, but we don't have to upgrade that something new to like a whole other law. It might have been just another nuance of the law that's already under discussion. Now the Gemara goes to the second dispute between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, and the Brisa teaches, and for his sister a virgin that is near to him, that has no husband, for her he may become impure. The Kohen who becomes impure for the dead, is prohibited to become impure for the dead, may become impure for the dead for close relatives, including his unmarried sister. So about this, becoming impure for her, optional, says Rabbi Yishmael, mandatory, says Rabbi Akiva. And what is the reason of Rabbi Yishmael? Since it is written, speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, there shall none become impure for the dead among his people, indicating that a priest is prohibited from contact with the dead. So it was necessary to be written, for her he may become impure, which teaches that he may become impure for this close relative. And so how does Rabbi Akiva derive that it is mandatory? Well, he derives that it is permissible from the previous verse, which states, except for his kin that is near to him. That's how we know he may become impure for the kin that are near to him. Since it is derived that it is permitted from that verse, why do I need the additional verse? For her he may become impure, to teach that it is mandatory. And so how does Rabbi Yishmael explain the repetition? He explains that the verse teaches he may become impure for her whole body, but he may not become impure to bury only one of her limbs, right? He may become impure to participate in the burial of her, corpse, which is whole, but if for some reason the corpse became dismembered, then no, he cannot participate in the burial just to, bury one of those limbs. Now we're on 3b. And what does Rabbi Akiva respond to this claim? And the Gemara answers, if so, that the verse serves to render it prohibited for a priest to become impure to bury only a partial corpse, then let the merciful one write, and for his sister a virgin that is near to him, that has had no husband, for her, and then be silent. Why do I need the verse to write, may he become impure? We would have known that that's what this exception was about. Learn from the additional phrase that making himself impure for this sister and for other close relatives is mandatory. So how does Rabbi Yishmael explain the additional phrase? And the verse wrote, for her, it also wrote, may he become impure. And for the same reason that was taught by the school of Rabbi Yishmael. This extra phrase is adding a nuance so that we understand about the limb, etc. It's kind of a complete phrase, but it doesn't, the phrases work together to teach for the limb and not for the corpse and not for just the limb. But the parts of that phrase don't add an additional halacha. Now the Gemara goes on to the third dispute between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. The verse states, of them may you make your slave forever. Leviticus 25:46, speaking about the Canaanite slaves, that you can keep them forever. Rabbi Yishmael says, optional to keep them forever. Rabbi Akiva says, mandatory. They may not be freed. What is the reason for Rabbi Yishmael? Since it is written, you shall save alive nothing that breathes. I wonder, like, why are we even talking about Canaanite slaves if the original commandment was to wipe them out? Well, they didn't wipe them out. So at that point, it also includes that you can leave them as slaves, but at least that way you wipe them out as a free people because they were dangerous people when on their own, practicing child sacrifice and other, horrific practices. So what is the reason of Rabbi Yishmael? Since it is written, you shall save nothing alive that breeds, it was necessary to write, of them you may take your slave forever, as well in order to permit one from any of the other non-Canaanite nations who engaged in sexual intercourse with a Canaanite woman and she bore him a child. So maybe they wiped out the Canaanite men. They allowed the Canaanite women to live. Maybe that was okay. So what about these children by non-Canaanite fathers and a Canaanite mother? What about them? This verse teaches that you are permitted to purchase that child as a slave, as he is not included in the mitzvah of you shall save alive nothing that breeds, meaning wipe them out, that was stated with regard to full-fledged Canaanites. Therefore, the verse cannot be teaching that it is mandatory. And this is as it is taught in a Baraisa. From where is it derived that in the case of one from any of the other non-Canaanite nations who engaged in sexual intercourse with a Canaanite woman and she bore him a child, that you are permitted to keep that child as a slave? And the verse states, moreover, of the children of the strangers that do sojourn among you, of them may you buy. Remember, we can't, understand this. It's so distasteful to discuss anything that has to do with slavery to our, more modern, more evolved ear, let's say. But in that ancient world, slavery was such a common practice that what the Torah came and did is sort of, add regulations and safeguards about how, slavery proceeded. It was not feasible to wipe out slavery in the world at that time. So what does it say? The verse states, moreover, the children of the strangers that do sojourn among you, of them you may buy. Leviticus 25:45. And this verse permits the purchase of slaves from among those individuals who are not members of the Canaanite nations, even if they settle in the land of Israel. And the Baraisa continues, one might have thought that even in the case of a Canaanite man who engaged in sexual intercourse with a woman from one of the other nations and she bore him a child, that you are permitted to purchase that child as a slave despite the fact that the father is a Canaanite. Therefore, the same verse states, which they have given birth in your land, teaching that one is permitted to purchase slaves only from the ones who are born in your land, but whose paternal origins are from other lands, but not from the ones who already reside in your land, i.e. ones who have a Canaanite father. And the Gemara asks, so how does Rabbi Akiva derive this law? And he derives it from the words in the same verse, of them may you buy. Once the law is already taught that one may purchase as a slave the child of a Canaanite woman and a man from another nation, why do I need the verse to state, of them may you take your bondmen forever? It is stated to teach that it is mandatory to enslave a Canaanite slave forever. The Gemara asks, and what does Rabbi Yishmael derive from this verse? And the Gemara answers, of them may you take your bondmen forever. It teaches that you can enslave of them, but not of your brethren. It is prohibited to enslave a fellow Jew, even if he's a slave, forever, right? Jewish slaves go free after 6 years. And the Gemara asks, and how does Rabbi Akiva derive this law? The prohibition against enslaving your brethren is derived from the latter part of the verse, where it is explicitly stated, but over your brethren, the children of Israel, you shall not rule one over another with rigor. Leviticus 25:46. So the Gemara asks, and what does Rabbi Yishmael derive from this verse? He answers, since it is written, but over your brethren, which explicitly teaches that it is prohibited to subjugate a Jew forever, it also writes with regard to Canaanites, of them. But that phrase does not teach a novel halacha. And what is the reason for this? And it's that same reason that's given, that at the school of Rabbi Yishmael says, a phrase can be repeated to add nuance to the previous law, not necessarily to teach a new law. Now, the Gemara discusses matters related to sin and sexual impropriety. Rav Chisda says, licentious behavior in a home causes damage like a worm causes damage to sesame. Right? Worm, karya, the root of this word and its meaning are not clear. It has been suggested that it is based on the Latin carius, meaning lack, rot, or decay. But on this idea, like a worm damages sesame, Rashi explains this to mean like a worm consuming sesame. And the Aruch explains similarly, though he may understand kari is referring to decay or spoilage. Others hold that the word shumashema refers to the worm itself, and kari means the heat or cold that kills the worm. At any rate, the idea is that licentious behavior in a home causes damage. And Rav Chisda says anger in a home causes damage, like a worm causes damage to sesame. And the Gemara comments both this and that, i.e. licentious behavior and anger destroy a home. And these teachings were said with regard to the woman of the house. But with regard to the man, although these behaviors are improper, they are not condoned, but we do not have the same extreme consequences with regard to it, as the woman's role in the home is more significant, resulting in a more detrimental result if she acts improperly. Presumably what they're saying is, if the woman is carrying on having a licentious, flirtatious behavior or angry all the time, because she's the primary caregiver of the children are going to see that behavior up close, nonstop, and it's going to affect their values and morals growing up, and that's what's really going to destroy the home. It's terrible for a husband to behave that way, but at least the children won't be witnessing it constantly. And Rav Chisda says, initially, before the Jewish people sinned in the matter of the golden calf, the divine presence resided with each and every one of them, as it is stated, for the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp, Deuteronomy 23:15. Once they sinned, the divine presence withdrew from them, as it is stated in that same verse, that he see no unseemly matter in you and turn away from you, teaching that when there is an unseemly matter among the Jewish people, the divine presence no longer resides among them. And Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Yonason says, anyone who fulfills one mitzvah in this world, the mitzvah precedes him and goes before him to the world to come. As it is stated, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord your God shall be your reward. Isaiah 58:8. And anyone who commits one transgression in this world, it shrouds him and goes before him to the day of judgment. As it is stated, the paths of their way do wind. They go up into the waste and are lost. Bottom line, we're held accountable for every transgression we commit while we're alive, and we're rewarded for every commandment that we perform while we are alive, right? And so our deeds follow us into the next world. Rabbi Elazar says the transgression is chained to him and accompanies him like a dog, as it is stated concerning Joseph's refusal to commit adultery with the wife of Potiphar, that he listened not to her, to lie by her, or to be with her, which is understood to mean if he would agree to lie by her in this world, the result would be that he would have to be with her forever, as the transgression would accompany him into the world to come. Now the Gemara returns to discussion of the number of witnesses necessary for different elements of the process of a woman becoming a sota. We learned in a Mishna elsewhere on page 31a, with regard to the credibility of one witness who testifies concerning a woman's infidelity, the law that one witness is deemed credible concerning defilement needs to be stated, as by right, it should not be deemed credible based on the following Kal V'chomer inference. And just as with regard to the first testimony concerning seclusion, which does not forbid her to her husband with an irrevocable prohibition, as the woman can be found innocent, permitting her to again to her husband after she drinks the bitter waters, it is not established with fewer than two witnesses, as that Mishnah is written in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua, who stated in our Mishnah that the testimony of two witnesses must be provided by two witnesses. Then with regard to the final testimony concerning defilement, which would forbid her to her husband with an irrevocable prohibition, is it not logical that it not be established with fewer than two witnesses, right? Understand, they're saying we've established two witnesses need to see the warning, two witnesses need to see the seclusion, then she becomes a sota. But she can become, and she's now prohibited to her husband, but she can become permitted to him again if she drinks the bitter water. She's found innocent. They go back there home. But if a single witness sees, after the two witnesses saw the warning and two witnesses saw the seclusion, that she actually slept with the man who's not her husband, then the husband and wife become prohibited to each other forever. They must divorce. They cannot be reconciled. And how could we allow that to be established by a single witness? And as we said, it's not really a single witness because we already had 2 witnesses to the warning and 2 witnesses to the seclusion. Then a single witness is sufficient to establish the defilement. But without the 2 witnesses to the warning and 2 witnesses to the seclusion, if it was only a witness of the test that she was defiled, that would not suffice with 1 witness. For that, you would need 2 witnesses. But here we're saying, well, even with 2 witnesses to the warning and 2 witnesses to the seclusion, why are we going to allow just 1 witness to say she was defiled and then trigger that they must divorce and they're prohibited to each other forever? Maybe we should require 2 witnesses for that also. Therefore, to counter this derivation, the verse states, and there is no witness against her, teaching that any testimony that there is against her with regard to her defilement is sufficient. If there were no witnesses at all, why are we even talking about it? No one would be talking about this because no one would know. So it must be that we're talking about a single witness, and therefore a single witness is enough to prohibit them to each other if it's a single witness to the defilement after the 2 witness warning and the 2 witness seclusion. The Mishnah asks, and now that it is established that 1 witness suffices to testify with regard to defilement, well, then maybe we should run the Kal Vachomer inference in reverse and say that with regard to the first testimony of seclusion, so just as with regard to this final testimony of defilement, which renders them prohibited forever, that we could do that with 1 witness, well, then with regard to the witnesses of seclusion, that she secluded herself after a warning, which is not going to render them prohibited forever, maybe 1 witness should suffice for that as well. Therefore, to counter this derivation, the verse states, if a man marries a woman and lives with her, and it will be that she did not find favor in his eyes, because he has found some unseemly matter, and matter is davar, about her, Deuteronomy 24:1, and over there, in the verses concerning the laws of monetary matters, it says, by the mouth of 2 witnesses, or by the mouth of 3 witnesses, shall a matter, a davar, be established. And this teaches that just as the matter stated there is established by the mouth of 2 witnesses, so too here the matter of her seclusion must be established by 2 witnesses. So the Gemara asks, is this need for 2 witnesses derived from because he found some unseemly matter about her? It is derived from, and there is no witness against her. Against her. Numbers 5:13, which is explained to mean that there were not 2 witnesses, but only 1 who testified concerning her defilement. So the Gemara above in 2b derives from the term against her, which could also be understood as with regard to it, that in this matter of defilement 1 witness suffices, but not with regard to the warning. And one also derives with regard to it, but not with regard to the seclusion. Therefore, there must be 2 witnesses to testify about both the warning and the seclusion. So the Mishnah should have given this inference as the source for requiring 2 witnesses for seclusion, and not the juxtaposition of matter and learning out from monetary matters. I'm almost done. If you have questions or comments, get them in. So the Gemara answers, that is also what he is saying. The Mishnah should read, the verse states, and there is no witness against her, teaching with regard to it, but not with regard to the warning. And one also derives with regard to it, but not with regard to the seclusion. And the Gemara comments, and with regard to defilement in general, without a prior warning, and without witnesses to seclusion, from where do we derive that 1 witness is not deemed credible, as I've said several times, right? If you don't have the 2 witness warning, the 2 witness seclusion, 1 witness is certainly not enough to render a woman prohibited to her husband who says that she slept with some guy. You need at least 2 witnesses for that. And how do we know that? Here it is stated, because he has found some unseemly matter about her, and there it is stated, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall a matter be established, teaching that just as the matter stated there is established by 2 witnesses, so too here, with regard to defilement, it is established by 2 witnesses. And we will stop there and pick it up tomorrow night, Sunday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, for page 4 here in Tractate Sotah. Let's see if we've got any questions or comments on Sotah, page 3. Hold on a second. Joseph. Is it merely assumed that if a woman secludes herself with another man, it goes without saying that there is adultery? No, it is not assumed, right? It is not assumed. What we said is the guy has reason to be jealous, so he warns her, and that has to be in front of two witnesses. Then she secludes herself with that other man anyway, and there were two witnesses to that. So now she's a sota. Is a sota an adulteress? No. A sota is a suspected adulteress. How are we going to prove her innocence, right? There are no witnesses. In the normal case, there is no witness who can say, I saw that they actually slept together. Usually that doesn't happen. They were secluded. How is there possible that there's a witness to happens what happens in there? Some kind of peeping Tom? So usually, no, we don't have any firm proof. And we do not assume that because they were secluded, even after the warning, that they necessarily slept together. But it is definitely inappropriate behavior. And that's why they now become prohibited to each other, but they can be restored to each other through the procedure of the sota. Now, it's not a nice procedure. They're now prohibited to each other. At some point, they got to go to Jerusalem, go to the temple. That's why it can only be done when the temple is standing. And as we'll see later in the tractate, they're going to write down the verses on a piece of parchment, put that paper in the water. The ink dissolves, some dirt from the temple floor goes in the bowl with the water. She drinks that. If she's innocent, nothing happens, and this is now considered a proven matter that she did not commit adultery. If drinking those waters causes her stomach to explode and she dies, that's because she did commit adultery. But in the absence of kind of that miraculous proof that she actually committed adultery, then the husband and the husband can now be assured that she did not cheat on him. And God willing, and having gone through this ordeal, the couple will now find a way to create peace and love and harmony back in their home, go home, and not ever participate in such an ordeal again, God willing. That's what I have for us tonight. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific for Sotah, page 4. Have a good week. Have a great week. Passover coming when